Hi, welcome back to Future Fast. And like always, we have a very interesting guest today. And before I introduce our guest to you, I hope you're enjoying Future Fast. And those of you who have not yet subscribed to Future Fast, this is the time to do it. And we'll just jump straight into our conversation. And today we have Dr. Adrian Blanck. Uh, I'll give you a quick introduction, Adrian, before I bring you into the conversation. Adrian Blanck is an international energy expert focusing on digital innovation and strategy, performance optimization, and business transformation. Adrian has a value creation track record of 30 years with Aramco, Total, ELF, and Shell in a variety of management roles requiring both technical, commercial, and financial expertise, as well as in consultant and broad level advisory roles in Europe and MENA region with Accenture as well. A mechanical engineer by training, Adrian has a master degree in hydraulic automation from the Polytechnic University of Bucharest, a master degree in business administration with focus on strategy and finance from INSEAD, and a doctoral degree in business administration from the University of Manchester, where he focused on digitalization and data-driven decision making. During his last 10 years with Aramco, Adrian has advised several Aramco joint ventures and subsidiaries such as Petro Rabigh, Sadara, and Luberev on key organizational issues related to digital transformation, operational excellence, energy efficiency, carbon footprint, performance management, and process optimization. Dr. Blanck is an active contributor and speaker on a range of issues from energy transition and sustainability to organizational performance optimization. Adrian is currently Chief Digitization Officer for Saudi Aramco Base Oils Company, which is a Saudi Aramco group company. And at this point in time, I would like to make it one point very clear that Adrian is with us in a personal capacity. And this conversation in the podcast, he is not representing the company, and all the views and opinions are purely his personal opinions. Adrian, welcome to Future Fast.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Adrian, can you please take us and our audience and listeners through your journey through the oil and gas energy industry to the current role that you're in?
Yes, with pleasure. My journey started 30 years ago. I was graduating from my master's degree in engineering, and I was lucky enough to get a first job with an oil and gas company. It was a company that was at the time part of, it was an oil field equipment manufacturer that was part of, later will be part of Halliburton. And so I worked briefly as a quality assurance engineer for this company, and then I was recruited by Shell, and I started one of the most interesting professional journeys of my professional life with Shell in downstream. After Shell, I moved on. I went to INSEAD to get a master degree in business administration, and then I joined Accenture as a management consultant for the oil industry. Worked with Accenture for about 7 years, and then I moved on to ELF and then to Total, because ELF Aquitaine was morphed into Total Energies of today. Then I left the corporate world and concentrated on some of my private ventures for a few years. I always had various pet projects, you know, just alongside my corporate activity. And these projects, at some point in time, they morphed into something that I considered to be a full-time effort, and I concentrated on that. With mixed success, I would say. So I launched about 9 ventures in total. 3 of them have been successful. And one of them I managed to complete an exit that was not only interesting from a business standpoint, but also made quite a little bit of money. And when I exited the business, I received an offer to join Saudi Aramco in the downstream sector. And yeah, that was 10 years ago. That brought me to Saudi Arabia and to a fantastic journey with the company that sets up the pace in the global economy. Unbelievable 10 years from all points of view.
Wonderful. Adrian, how do you see particularly your learning from your entrepreneurial journey contributing to your work? Because I think your academics and working for various large corporations, including consulting function, but how much of a difference the entrepreneurial journey has brought into your decision making versus your professional experience?
That's an interesting question, Andrew, because the current assumption is that it's either or. The moment you decide to go into entrepreneurship, it's a one-way street. You cannot come back to the corporate world, and the other way around. And I think that's a lot of nonsense. There are extremely valid points you take with you in your professional life from both corporate world and entrepreneurship, personal ventures, and it's just a matter of putting all those experiences to good use. In my case, what entrepreneurship taught me is how important for your business venture are things that you don't necessarily pay attention to in the corporate world. For example, pragmatism and focusing on simple things that yield results. How important, we learn in finance that it's one of the most important things for companies to have a robust cash flow. We say cash is king. Well, when you're working with your own money, that becomes something totally different from how it feels when you're working for a big corporation that has, lines of financing agreed with the top world banks, etc. Totally different experience. It also taught me quite a lot of things about what personal involvement and personal responsibility is all about. One of my companies had about 85 employees, and you feel responsible because you are in charge of the well-being of quite a number of people. And that kind of responsibility, has a certain weight on your shoulders and on the decisions you make and on the way you approach daily business, which is a totally different environment from what you see in the corporate world. So yeah, my entrepreneurship was extremely beneficial for my corporate career, and my corporate career was extremely beneficial for my entrepreneurial ventures, because I brought to the entrepreneurial sector the rigor and the analytic mind of a fairly decent management professional and management consultant.
Well, Adrian, you have been one of those few highly successful professionals who moves into entrepreneur, goes through the grind, but also had a good exit to come out with making money for yourself, and again get back into a significantly important role in one of the largest companies in the sector, right? So obviously,
I think it's the largest company in the world by far.
It is the largest, yeah. So
Saudi Aramco, if we take the first 15 companies in the world and we put them all together, they are still not as big as Saudi Aramco is. So, just to put things into perspective.
Right. So, given that, right? So, what kind of a role you think? There are most times you hear an executive in a professional environment, a leadership in a leadership function is always referred to is having burnt out, because the stress in a large corporation is very high and people tend to burn out. You never hear about an entrepreneur burning out, right? So you have seen the high in corporate, and you've gone through the how do I put it, that high and low of the entrepreneurial journey, and then back into this kind of a function. So how do you attribute this? How do you see this? And where do you attribute the stress part to be very high in an entrepreneurial function or in a professional area?
I think they're equally stressful, but the stress elements come from different directions. In the corporate world, you always worry about the corporate ladder, about the security of your job, and obviously the higher you are on the company totem pole, the more the riskier the positions tend to be. That's why, at the very top of the company, as a CEO, you have most of the time, or an executive officer for a large corporation, you tend to have what we call a golden parachute to make sure that, in case you are ejected from your role, there is some kind of a safety net that you can have. In the entrepreneurial entrepreneurial world, things are different. The stress comes mainly from the concern of your business going forward and surviving the next day or the next week or the next month or the next, securing the next contract or getting the next financial instrument that's crucial for the survival of your business, or worrying about government decisions that can impact your business. And we only have to go back 2 years and think about COVID and how COVID reshaped the face of the economic world, especially when small and medium-sized businesses are concerned.
Correct.
Or what happens in case of a downturn, because the small businesses are the first ones who get into financial troubles. But I would say both are equally stressful. I got my first burnout when I was a management consultant, and that was actually the reason I exited management consulting and I went back to industry, because my trajectory was, I started in industry with Halliburton and Shell. I moved into management consulting, then I came back to industry for management consulting. Because 7 years as a management consultant took a toll on my body, and I suffered a burnout. I didn't suffer a burnout as a private entrepreneur, but the reason I exited entrepreneurship and went back to the corporate world was first because I managed to achieve an exit for my main business, and also because I didn't want to have the financial responsibility that was growing with the growing of my business. The end game for me would have been to go for an IPO, but in Europe, if you want to have a successful IPO, you need to have a turnover of about, I would say, at that time was between 20 and 25 million euros turnover. And we were struggling to go beyond 18 million euros turnover annually. We had hit some sort of glass ceiling and we couldn't increase it further. And because we couldn't go for an IPO, we were finding increasingly difficult to finance the business. And financing the business also required all sorts of personal financial guarantees and financial liabilities. And I was growing uncomfortable with those liabilities increasing. And that was one of the reasons I was seeking an exit. And yeah, I managed to do it, and I went back to the corporate world. But going back to your point, I think both can be quite stressful, and it takes some learning.
Right.
On how to deal.
Oh, I lost the sound in between towards that.
Sorry, it might be the case from time to time, because I may have calls that are coming, and so unfortunately, this might occur from time to time. What I was saying that both trajectories, both career lines can be equally stressful.
Correct.
And it takes a little bit of learning and know-how to understand how to deal with it and how to pay close attention to what your body and your mind are telling you. Because if you do pay close attention, they are telling you when it's too much.
True, very true. So, what is it that you are doing now that you think will help you succeed going forward in whichever way, I mean, professionally, entrepreneurially, whichever?
I'm working in an area where the only constant thing is change. So I think that's also valid for our entire society today, not only for my line of work. I think one of the main attributes is constant learning. So I try to learn constantly on a daily basis in both structured and unstructured ways. I try to add new qualifications to my professional profile every year. So every year I go for a formal qualifications and for formal training in an area that I consider to be of interest, and I'm learning on a daily basis. For example, having this conversation with you, it's a great learning curve for me. The other thing I'm doing, in general, I try to stay quite active. I try to divide my time in some sort of intelligent way between my professional life and my personal life, between what I'm doing for a living and what I'm interested in as a human being, my family, my passions and my hobbies, my faith, my community, trying to get back and give back to the society a little bit. So yeah, I'm trying to have a kind of a stable foundation for my life.
But
And
what is
I would
interesting,
say
you said you acquire formal learning every year.
Yes.
You actually go back to a university and take up some certification program every year?
Yes, all the time.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
And I've been doing this for the last. I graduated INSEAD in 2000. So ever since, I've gone back to university. I did another MBA just because before I started my doctoral degree, I just wanted to see if I'm still competitive in the academic environment. And one of my mentors, Professor Spyros Makridakis, which I had the honor to be a student of at INSEAD. Professor Makridakis was the emeritus statistics and data science professor at INSEAD, and he was always telling me, you need to keep going back to school every now and then just to make sure your brain is still churning properly. So I followed his advice, and I did another MBA. Started when was it? 8 years ago, and then after I finished it, I said, well, still brain is still working, and then I started my PhD, and but other than that, every year I'm going back to a few universities that I'm adding a certification in an area that I'm
so
interested
what is
in. Yes.
Just curious, what is the last certificate you acquired? Which area is that?
I did a certification in data. Yeah, so it was like a 2-month course online.
Adrian, can you speak about people who have been influential in your life, who could be, you think or attribute to who you are today to somebody like that?
I would say most of what I'm today and who I'm today, I owe it to my parents. I was lucky enough to be born in a family where both my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents and my great grandparents had advanced university degrees. So in a way, it's funny because I'm the fifth generation of people in my family who have gone through a doctoral degree. My father, my mother, and my father had probably the most influence on me, especially my father, who was a professor as well. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 years ago. Then the first professor of physics I had in secondary school had a major impact on me. I still remember him coming to the first physics class. I was probably seventh grade, I think. And he wrote on the blackboard. We didn't have fancy digital anything back then. It was a blackboard, and he wrote with a piece of chalk on the blackboard, the fundamental thing you have to know about life. And the fundamental question in physics is why. And he wrote a Y in capital letters, big as the blackboard, and a question mark. And that stood with me, and it provided probably the foundation for my assertiveness, my desire to, uncover the why in everything. And then I was lucky enough to have two wonderful professors during my MBA at INSEAD. I was honored to have Nouriel Roubini as a professor of macroeconomics. And I remember Professor Roubini lecturing us in 1999 about a major financial crisis that's blooming in the real estate sector in the US, coming from or happening because a number of very special circumstances are happening at the same time. And he was warning about what we call securitization in the derivative instruments of the financial world, which was exactly what happened a few years later with the big crisis of the 2007, 2008. And then I mentioned him before, Professor Spiros Makridakis, who was the emeritus professor of data and statistics at INSEAD. And yeah, so that's in a nutshell the people who had the most influence on my becoming.
Well, Adrian, is it okay to ask you where were you born? Because you said fifth generation of doctoral PhD. I mean, that's...
Yeah. My family is quite an international family. I was born in Romania. My father is of British and Dutch origin, and my mother is of Greek origins. So I was born in Romania, and I spent the first 16 years, 17 years of my life in Romania.
And 5 generations of PhD from where?
Yeah.
UK?
From my father's side. From my father's side, UK and Netherlands. Yes, Holland, back in the day.
Okay. All right. So, can you talk about books and podcasts that you follow? Because I think one is that you also go back to college, go back to school. Apart from that, what are the books, podcasts, something that you follow, read that our readers and listeners can also look up to?
I follow two podcasts on a very regular basis. One is Lex Fridman, who's an MIT professor, and he's extremely prolific and a wonderful podcaster and a wonderful interviewer. He's most focusing on technical and more academic type of subjects. I also follow Joe Rogan, and I find Joe to be an amazing person. And the range of issues that he's tackling in his podcast is just mind blowing. And he's equally good in tackling complex issues that are of interest today, like, I don't know, energy transition and sustainability and diversity and equity and inclusions and nonsense like that. And also more mundane things like mixed martial arts and boxing and the world of sports. I find him absolutely fantastic. In terms of books, the book I'm reading now is a book by John Stilwell, Professor Stilwell, which is called The Story of Proof. It's a book about logic and math, and more specifically about the history of mathematics. Fantastic. It's a fantastic read, and I fully recommend it to all your auditors and to all listeners if they're interested in the more rigorous aspect of how things happen in life, and what is proof? What is the philosophic underlying of proof of something? And I find that absolutely fascinating.
Story of Proof, right?
Yes, The Story of Proof by John Stilwell. That's Professor Stilwell. Fantastic author. Well, movies, don't have an awful lot of time for movies. I saw Oppenheimer, and I thought the movie to be quite good. Maybe I was expecting a little bit more simply because of the critics and the hype that was generated around the movie, but I found it historically accurate, which is probably the most important element of a movie like that, depicting a character like Dr. Oppenheimer.
Have you read the book which this movie is supposed to be based on, The American Prometheus?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I've not watched the movie yet, but I just love that book.
Yeah, the movie does a good job at putting the book on the screen.
Okay.
And it also shows the duality of Dr. Oppenheimer's personality in a way, as a scientist torn between uncovering the ultimate secret of the material world and having his invention in a way brought to the world, and the terrible consequences of doing so. And I think Cillian Murphy is doing a great job at portraying that. I saw a documentary the other day that I found interesting, but from a different perspective. It's called Endgame 2050, which is basically about, the end of the world coming by 2050, unless we do something to curb the current trajectory of our civilization. And I would give it the gold medal for the woke movie of the year, because it touches on every single woke concept of our modern developed world.
Wow.
People being too many, people doing bad things, destroying the world, destroying the earth, bringing an end to our civilization, global warming, carbon dioxide. It ticks all the boxes of the woke movement of the day. And it's interesting to see, because it puts things into perspective. It tells you, one, how people who have no idea about such complex things think about these complex things, how entitled they may feel about these sort of things, and the kind of mark that it can leave on the society, because a lot of people are seeing it, and a lot of people will draw conclusions based on what they see. And they'll say, yeah, boy, it's the end of the world coming by 2050. So we need to do something, and we need to do something radical, and we need to do something radical now because it's the end of the world coming, which is a fairly dangerous way of looking at things to come, in my opinion.
Yeah, can you repeat the title of the documentary?
End Game 2050.
End Game 2050. Okay.
Yeah.
And would you recall which platform you saw it on? Netflix or?
Yeah, it's on Netflix, I think. Yeah, on Netflix.
Okay, wonderful. Right. Well, thank you so much. And I just have one more question before we conclude this part of the conversation. If you have to
Sure.
identify or recognize a failure, or not necessarily a failure, it could even be something you regard at that point in time as a mistake. And would you be able to recall what they were and what kind of learning you had from that mistake or failure?
That's a tough one. Fantastic question, nevertheless. I would say I think we all have a tendency of thinking we can always do a little more and can do a little better. And in my case, that is something coming from the way I was brought up by my family, which in itself is a good engine to push you forward. It's not necessarily a good thing for building self-confidence. And, you know, when I was a management consultant, I was doing a lot of recruiting at the leading MBA schools in the world for my company. And when you recruit consultants, there is a specific personality archetype that you look for. And because only those people tend to be successful in such a high demanding environment like management consulting, where, you know, you work extremely long hours. There is constant pressure to deliver. You have this whole up or out kind of policy. You know, if you don't get promoted, you're automatically leaving, etc. So it's a high stress environment. And the personality archetype that you tend to look for, you look for insecure overachievers. And it makes insecurity makes people work harder and harder and harder. And that is why the typical exit from management consulting is through a burnout. And I have gone through a significant, pretty severe burnout in my life. And that is probably something that I would do better next time around had I had the chance. Paying more attention to what my body and my mind can take in terms of load and stress level and output, and learn how to handle it in a better way, because a burnout is a nasty experience.
Well, Adrian, I said last, but I'll just one more question.
Sure, no problem.
See, we most times we tend to get into a loop. You know, we do something and we want to do it. We want to change the way we have done it, but we think we are changing it, but we will possibly be doing the same thing in a different way. So, you know, it's in fact, I found myself doing it until a friend pointed out to me. After that, I became really conscious and start looking at, am I in a loop? So that is one thing I'd really like to know, whether do you find yourself in a loop, or there was a time you found yourself in some loop, and you know whether you consciously got out. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I think all of us are doing it. The only thing is probably the degree to which we're doing it varies. The first thing you need to realize you're in a loop, and the best way to realize you're in a loop is when you bang your head on a wall, because that tends to hurt. So that brings you, you ding yourself a little bit, and then that rings a bell in a very physical way, and it tells you. I was saying that it's very difficult because we are human beings, and we're not perfect. We're prone to failure. We're prone to making mistakes. I think the only question is, are we aware that we get into behavioral loops? And when we tend to hit a wall and bang ourselves against a wall, it tends to hurt a little bit. Hopefully not too much, not with lasting consequences. So that jolts you back into a little bit of reflection on the way you're going and where you're going, and it makes you aware of the loop that you may be in. So hopefully that is enough input to make you get out of the loop and onto a proper, slightly different path. But yes,
right.
well, in my case,
I never realized till a friend pointed it out to me. So sometimes I think as an entrepreneur, you kind of tend to become a little thick-skinned. So you probably don't realize the bump that you're hitting. So,
that's why I think it's really important to surround yourself with real people, people who can look you in the eye and tell you things that may not be necessarily flattering or all positive or all good. It's really important to have people who can tell you, look, I think what you're doing here is not the better way of.
Yep. So very true. Thank you so much, Adrian. And that's Dr. Adrian Blanck. And come back soon. We are going to have more conversation and talk more about oil and energy, and mostly energy and sustainability. So, and until then, do share this conversation with all the people you think will appreciate. And obviously, the next part of the conversation will be more interesting for every one of you. And for those of you who have not yet signed up or registered with FutureFast, do it right now. And till we get to the next conversation, enjoy the ride. And Adrian, thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much. A pleasure being with you. Thank you.